I love talking about movies, but sometimes I tend to ramble about them. That's why I've decided to challenge myself with a new series on this channel, 5 Sentence Reviews, where I review a number of movies with only 5 sentences that may or may not be run-on sentences. In this video, I will be reviewing movies I have watched during my annual ritual, the 31 Days of Horror, in which I watch nothing but horror-related content for the entire month of October. I will be ranking the movies I saw from worst to best for your viewing pleasure. Enjoy! This movie is so dark. Literally, the screen is completely black with just moving shapes for long sequences of time throughout the movie. And even in daytime sequences, the lighting and camera quality is very bad, and the camera is shot so close to the characters that they often obstruct most of the screen. I'm all for defending experimental, slow-paced art house movies, but fuck me is this movie pretentious in how it tries to be edgy and disturbing, when it is actually completely boring, shallow, and uninteresting. This movie actually has a kind of cult following and has a lot of great reviews on Letterboxd, and is even on the 1001 Movies to See Before You Die list, which I find very frustrating because it makes me wonder, okay, what the hell am I missing here? The only reason why I'm giving this movie a 3 out of 10 instead of a 2 out of 1 is because there were a handful of scenes that were actually inspired and interesting and watchable. And it's obvious that the director and actors put their heart and soul into this movie, and I get what they were trying to do, and I really want to like it, but fuck this movie. Despite its association with French New Wave extreme movies such as Martyrs, Inside, and High Tension, which are extremely intense and effectively infect you with their brand of nihilism, Frontiers is incredibly predictable and actually rather boring. Its protagonists range from unlikable to uninteresting, and its antagonists are one-dimensional neo-Nazis. Making your antagonist Nazis is a really easy way to characterize them as pure evil, without putting any effort into making them or their motivations interesting, like, say, the antagonist in Martyrs. It also has a completely unnecessary and kind of pretentious first act dealing with riots happening in Paris because a far-right candidate is elected for president. Because of how many cliches it steals from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, watching Frontiers feels like watching Rob Zombie's The Devil's Rejects if that movie took itself too seriously and was badly paced. There's really not that much to say about this Thai horror movie about the ghost of a witch who haunts the theater that plays the movie about her. Its scares were mostly really cheap and predictable, but they made the movie entertaining. I actually kind of liked the movie within the movie, which seemed to be a more well-made and scarier movie than the majority of the actual movie. The whole idea of a haunted movie or haunted movie theater is definitely one that could be intriguing just from a meta standpoint, and I would like to see it done seriously one day, but this movie isn't it. I liked how the ghost was anti-piracy though. I've gone itching to do a full-length review of both Chester and Turner movies, so I will be brief here. Black Devil Doll from Hell is not a good movie. The video and sound quality sucks. The homemade soundtrack often overshadows the dialogue.
It is said that this puppet is able to give its owner its heartfelt wish.
And the camera spends a lot of time focusing and zooming in on nothing in particular. Despite all that, this is the type of movie I find fascinating because it's obvious that this movie about a black devil doll from hell that has sex with a sexually repressed woman and then disappears to leave her sexually frustrated, this crazy weird ass movie was somebody's passion project. The difference between a movie like this and something like Frontiers is that one is well-made, uninteresting trash, while the other is terribly made but intriguing and, dare I say it, entertaining trash.
Now that you have smelt the foulness of my breath, you may now taste the sweetness of my tongue.
The drop in quality from the second movie is immediately apparent here as we move away from the saga of Christy and Julia to resurrect Pinhead. The acting in this movie reminds me of a badly dubbed Italian Gallo.
We don't know the details, but I dream of death and trying to save him.
Pinhead suddenly becomes a talkative master of persuasion in this movie, which really ruins a lot of the mystery and menace around the character. For some reason, his voice seems to change from scene to scene, which was really distracting. The movie is kind of a slog to get through up until Pinhead enters the real world and creates new and rather ridiculous Cenobites. At which point the movie becomes a fun Nightmare on Elm Street knockoff, with all the Cenobites giving Freddy Krueger-ish one-liners.
Oh, what the
Ready for your close-up, Joey?
It only took 3 movies for this franchise to decide that it should not only make a prequel film, but should also bring the action into space. This really is not a good movie, but unlike the previous installment, it's never boring and it's a bit of a guilty pleasure for me. Going into the origins of the box itself isn't a really bad idea given how little is actually explained about it, and they already gave Pinhead an origin story anyways, so why the hell not? It seems they learned from the previous movie that rather than making a bunch of new, one-note Cenobites, it's better to just make one extremely creative and grotesque Cenobite like they did in Hellraiser 2. While the scenes in space are pretty great, the best thing about this movie is seeing Adam Scott in his first major role, where he basically plays evil 17th century French Ben Wyatt.
It hurts. It hurts.
This is a movie that really doesn't know if it wants to be about ghosts, vampires, witches, or zombies, or even cyborgs. There are so many ideas present in its later half that it becomes a strange and jumbled mess, but I do have to admire the ambition. The characters aren't very likable, especially the main character's boyfriend, who is a complete asshole that has the bright idea to rob an old comatose lady on Halloween night, and at one point punches a corpse for no apparent reason. With the exception of the corpse punching, a lot of the characters' reactions to stuff is actually really toned down and muted. Like when a character nonchalantly asks their friend if they are okay when they show up wearing an extremely bloody pillowcase on their head.
T'étais où, bordel?
Since the characters don't really react to stuff that is supposed to be scary, and sometimes don't even react strongly to pain, none of the scary parts are really effective, and with the exception of a gory scene near the end, the movie isn't very satisfying. This movie from James Whale is full of a bunch of horror tropes that you are all familiar with, such as the creepy family with an ill, bedridden family member that everyone seems to be afraid of, the old dark house itself that our protagonists are forced to stay in due to a storm blocking the road in both directions, and a bunch of red herrings as to who or what is the antagonist. The thing about the old dark house though is that it practically invented all these tropes, and furthermore has a unique sense of humor that doesn't take itself seriously, so that it feels like it's parroting these tropes at the same time as creating them. The movie even feels like a proto-slasher at times, in that some of the protagonists are actually kind of annoying and disrespectful assholes that you can't wait to see killed off. The only difference being that the protagonists in this movie and in something like Friday the 13th is that they are middle-aged adults, not teenagers. They don't fuck each other a lot, and none of them actually die because this is a movie from the 30s. Like a lot of horror movies from this era, it does take a while for something to happen, but it's always entertaining, mostly due to the wacky and hammy performances, including but not limited to Boris Karloff's dumb waiter.
Your music, are you? Well, I've got a bit of an ear myself. Have a potato.
I really wish I didn't have to devote a sentence to who directed this movie, but it does have to be said that the only reason why I and many people even watch this movie in the first place is because it's directed by Brandon Cronenberg, Canadian body horror legend David Cronenberg's son. Brandon continues the body horror trend of his dad with a very interesting premise about a world where celebrity worship has become such an obsession that people are willing to infect themselves with the same viruses that have infected their favorite celebrities, all in an attempt to feel closer to their idols. This movie probably would have worked better as a 45-minute episode of Black Mirror than a feature-length movie, as it does drag at points. That being said, I did find a lot to like about this movie, such as the performance from Cable Laundry Jones, the clinical set design and cinematography, and its willingness to throw subtlety out of the window and push its premise to the limits. Now I just want to know what was going on with that woman's anus. This movie is a bit of a slog to get through, but the conclusion is so satisfying that it almost makes up for it. For some reason, the director decided to have all the actors who are Indonesian to act in English, giving us some of the most hilariously badly delivered dialogue I've ever heard, especially from the protagonist.
Hi, honey. When are you coming home?
I'm done here. I'll be home tonight.
Okay.
Thankfully, there isn't much dialogue in this movie, and the lead performance is actually rather good when he isn't speaking. This movie kind of relies on you getting engrossed with the mystery and trying to figure out what exactly is going on, since the main character has amnesia, but otherwise it's just a bunch of running around in the woods for no apparent reason. Of the two Joko Anwar movies I've seen, I prefer Satan's Slaves, but he definitely seems like a horror director with potential. This is truly a movie of two halves, with the first half greatly exceeding the second half in terms of atmosphere, creepiness, dread, and menace. The scenes set at Dracula's castle and on the boat to England are legitimately unsettling, especially due to the set design and slow-paced cinematography. Once Dracula meets the Harkers, however, the movie becomes rather dull. While this movie features the iconic Dracula played by Bela Lugosi, and an equally iconic performance from Dwight Frey as Reinfeld, the Van Helsing of this movie, who appears out of nowhere and starts talking about vampires almost immediately, is not very memorable or interesting. I think the reason why Lugosi's Dracula is so iconic is because he really brings the humanity to the undead character, playing him as an eccentric but polite foreigner who can be charming at times, allowing him to burrow his way into society mostly unnoticed, until someone confronts him with a mirror, that is.
I am Dracula.
Oh, it's really good to see you.
I bid you welcome.
Talk about a glacial pace. This movie was shot by Takashi Shimizu in 8 days before he remade his movie The Grudge into the English language, and it really shows. That being said, I'm a sucker for Lovecraftian horror, and the first 30 minutes of this film really captures the dread and fear of the unknown that is often lacking from Lovecraft-inspired horror. For such a low-budget movie, there is a lot of ambition here, with a lot of weird ideas that could be legitimately unsettling at points, especially due to the voyeuristic found-footage nature of the film. I like how while a number of possible explanations for what is happening are brought up, they are kind of discarded almost immediately in favor of ambiguity and mystery. Like Tetsuo 2 Body Hammer, which is further up the list, this movie is more of a remix or remake rather than a sequel to the original Meatball Machine, which is also further up the list. The first 30 minutes are pretty exposition heavy and play out like a strange Japanese sitcom that introduces us to all the characters before the title card appears and the insanity begins. Compared to the first movie, there's more of everything. More characters, more blood, more nudity, and more parasite battles. I really liked how, like the Cenobites in Hellraiser 3, the monsters would incorporate whatever random object their human characters were associated with into their design. And I liked how they would fuse the body parts of their human victims onto their own bodies, so that at one point a monster is feeling up a woman's boobs with the hands of her own son. Overall, the creature designs in this movie enhanced the body horror aspect and felt more unique and less Tetsuo inspired than the first one. And there are some really memorable and insane scenes here. But if I had to pick between watching this movie or the original again, I think I would choose the original because sometimes less is more, and I prefer the look and feel of that film to the more modernized and clean looking sequel. Stagefright is a really fun, bloody, clever, and effective giallo about a group of stage actors locked in a theater with a killer. Honestly, that one sentence sums it up pretty well, but I guess I will keep going on for another 3. All the characters are a lot of fun, especially the director of the play who starts off as an asshole but eventually gets redeemed when he takes on a caring leadership role when the butchering starts. While the first hour of the movie is really fun with a lot of kills, the movie really comes together for me in the final act, which I found to be very suspenseful and creepy, with the exception of the very end, which was incredibly cheesy, predictable, and actually kind of hilarious. I've got one more sentence, so I'm just going to use it to acknowledge that the black guy does not die first. Meatball Machine is a really silly splatter movie about alien parasites that come to Earth in order to infect people and turn them into Tetsuo-inspired biomechanical weapons with the sole purpose of killing one another. In addition to being a grotesque alien fight movie, it's also a love story. Our protagonist is our typical Japanese loner dude who is in love with this loner girl who he stares at from afar until he stops her from getting raped by his boss. Apparently that is as far as his heroism goes, because when his would-be love interest gets infected by a parasite, all he does is sit there and watch in a scene that is both frustrating but probably realistic. Anyways, this movie is a lot of fun, and the parasites are honestly really cute. Look at it, it's so adorable! The Perfection is a rather ridiculous movie, but it's a lot of crazy fun, especially the first act. There are a lot of twists in this movie, and nothing is as it seems, so I would recommend going into it blind. Just make sure you're not squeamish when it comes to body horror. The first major set piece and twist is honestly extremely well executed and acted. That scene on the bus ramps up the anxiety and does not let up for a moment until the big reveal. After that, however, the movie begins to fall apart, but does so in such an entertaining way that I don't really mind, even though it does kind of trivialize a real and serious issue in a very stupid and unrealistic way.
You can do it! You can do this!
I'm dying!
What We Do in the Shadows, the series, is not as good as the movie that it got its name from, but it's still a very fun and enjoyable series with a lot of great new characters. This time the action is set in America and a new type of vampire called an energy vampire is introduced.
My name is Colin Robinson, and I am what's known as a psychic vampire, or energy vampire. This is my office, also known as the hunting ground. Hi, Deb. Energy vampires drain people's energy merely by talking to them. We either bore you with a long conversation. Better now, I was a little sick this weekend. Hey, Don. Don.
Some plot lines in the episodes are similar to those from the movie, but the series continues to find new ways to stay fresh, and I found that generally each episode was better than its predecessor. I really like the attention to detail in the series in regard to how the camera crew is able to get some of the footage and the dangerous conditions that the crew is put in. If I had one complaint about the show, It's that it's much more vulgar than the movie, and while I am not a prude and the sex jokes don't really bother me, what I found unique about the movie's sense of humor was that it was so wholesome, and that is something that is lost in the series.